Gennady Golovkin versus Daniel Jacobs, analysis and prediction. Brought to you by thefightjournal.com. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Fight Journal. All right, here we go. Today's prediction focuses on the March 18th, 2017 HBO pay-per-view matchup live from Madison Square Garden between Gennady Triple G Golovkin, 36 wins, 0 losses, 33 big wins by knockout, and Daniel Miracle Man Jacobs, 32 wins, 1 loss, 29 big wins by knockout. So let's look at the tail of the tape. Gennady Golovkin is 34 years old. He'll be 35 years old very soon. Daniel Jacobs, 29 years old. He'll be 30 years old. As a matter of fact, he may have had a birthday. I know it's coming up. Current status: Daniel Jacobs is WBA World Middleweight title holder, and Gennady Golovkin is the WBA Super World Middleweight champion, the IBF World Middleweight champion, the WBC World Middleweight champion, and the IBO World Middleweight champion. Gennady Golovkin is 5 foot 10 inches tall. Daniel Jacobs, 6 foot 1 inches tall. Gennady Golovkin has a 69-inch reach. Daniel Jacobs has a 73-inch reach. Both guys at about 90% knockout ratio. Daniel Jacobs last fought September 9th, 2016. Gennady Golovkin fought 1 day later, September 10th, 2016. The 29-year-old Jacobs out of Brooklyn, New York, hasn't lost in 6 years and has a 12-fight win streak, with all 12 victories coming via knockout. His current streaks includes wins over Giovanni Lorenzo, Caleb Truex, Peter Quillen, and Sergio Mora twice. The win against Quillen was Jacobs' biggest, and he fought like it as he jumped on Quillen in the first with a whirlwind of punches that punctuated by a right hand on the temple that wobbled Quillen enough for the referee, Harvey Dock, to end the fight for Kid Chocolate. Jacobs has hired a dream team for this one. In his fight for Golovkin, he's added Virgil Hunter to his training staff. He's training actually in Oakland, California. He's also brought in Andre Ward. In addition, he's added Chris Algieri as his nutritionist. And I believe he also has a strength and conditioning coach, if I'm not mistaken. Gennady Golovkin, a native of Kazakhstan, now training in Big Bear, California, came from a sterling amateur background, having won Olympic silver in 2004 and winning the World Championships in 2002 and 2003. He's had a significant amateur victories over Daniel Gill, Andre Durrell, Lucien Boutte, Andy Lee, and Matt Korobov. In the pro ranks, he's beaten every man he faced, including Kasim Uma, David Lemieux, Willie Monroe Jr., Matthew Macklin, Curtis Stevens, Daniel Gill, Martin Murray, and most recently, Kell Brook. I love this fight for both men. I really do. So let's take a look at some of the strengths and weaknesses. We'll start with Jacobs. And for Daniel Jacobs, it definitely starts with his hand speed. And if you don't believe me, I think Peter Quillen is still trying to figure out what hit him. And the same for Sergio Mora in both fights. Mora is a very unorthodox fighter, yet Daniel Jacobs' punches got home faster than the Latin snake's punches. Which brings us to his second strength. Most definitely, capital letters P-O-W-E-R, power. As I stated before, Jacobs has scored 12 knockouts in a row. And only a few men have survived his onslaught in his career. And with a guy like Golovkin, you better be ready to bring some offense. And this is what Jacobs does. And it'll serve him well in this fight. Only 3 men have gone the distance with Jacobs, including Ishai Smith, who's never been stopped, and a guy that Jacobs fought early in his career in a 6-rounder. Had Jacobs had 10 or 12 rounds with that guy, odds are he would have stopped him too. Another strength is I've also seen Jacobs do a good job at times of shortening up his punches on the inside, yet still having the ability to land big shots. So he can still land with power even on his shortened punches. You gotta like that, especially in a fight like this where I'm sure there'll be some inside action. In this fight, Jacobs also has a excellent, well, overall, just in general, he has excellent height and reach. I don't know if anyone saw the initial press conference in New York, but Jacobs, when they stood together, Jacobs looked like he was about 3 or 4 inches taller than Golovkin. I mean, he really looked like he was towering over Golovkin when they stood together. Now let's talk about weaknesses for Jacobs. All right. I know I'm in the minority here, but I'm not completely sold on the fact that Jacobs has a very poor chin that people talk about. A shaky chin, yes, but extremely poor, I'm not so sure about that. I'll tell you why. If you go back to the Dmitry Pirog fight, go to the knockdown of Jacobs. What I think happened in this fight is I think the Brooklyn showboating side of Jacobs came out in that fight. Hear me out. First of all, the punch Pirog landed would have knocked quite a few men out. Don't get me wrong. So Jacobs goes down. And I'm going to include a few videos below this so you can just select each link that I'm talking about just to see for yourself and leave your thoughts. Definitely leave your thoughts below. So Jacobs goes down. And then I think what he did was a Shannon Briggs, who's also by Brooklyn, by the way, who's also from Brooklyn, by the way. I think he did a Shannon Briggs imitation when Briggs fought Lennox Lewis. Alright, so the first video I want you to watch is, I want you to go to the 27-minute, 20-second mark of the video below of Lennox Lewis versus Shannon Briggs. 27-minute, 20-second mark. A few seconds later, Briggs goes down and he stretches out, he lays out. So much so that Jim Lampley pretty much said, okay, the fight's over. Briggs won't get up from this. So referee Frank Cappuccino reaches the count of 5 and Briggs gets up. But Briggs, even while hurt, brought that New York out of him by showing off a little bit. He's kind of like laid out like, oh, this is it. It's all over. And then he gets up and the fans get excited. I mean, they like, yes, all right, we got some more action. You know, he's a real New Yorker here. He's coming to fight. And so he got up, he continued, and went down again later on with a missed punch, and then Cappuccino just called the fight for some reason at that point. Now, take a look at the Jacobs versus the Pirog fight below. Okay? The right hand that Pirog landed was right on the button. Boom! You can go to the 1 minute 1 minute 47 second mark of the video. A few seconds later, Jacobs goes down and he lays out, just like Briggs. Referee Robert Byrd reaches the count of 5, looks at him, and waves the fight off. Jacobs, right as Byrd does this, raises up like Briggs did. And I think it was that Brooklyn, New York showboating thing that got him in this one. It didn't get Briggs, but it got the best of Jacobs. So Jacobs is to blame for that, because he was clearly okay at would have been the count of 6. When Robert Byrd got the 5 and then waved it off, he kind of jumped up, just like Briggs did with Lewis. Watch both fights. So it's Jacobs' fight. Jacobs fought for doing that. I mean, it's also Pirog's fault for landing that knockout punch. But you know who else is to blame here? It's the referee. Hear me out. If I was a referee, one belief that I always have is the count out. Give the guy that goes down a 10 count. Just count him out. Just count the 10 and just wave your arms and say it's over. Unless you see him laid out and his leg is kind of going through convulsions or something like that, then you realize something might be wrong. And you go ahead and wave it off and then call the doctor in or what have you. But I think Robert Byrd made a mistake in this one. And just like Briggs, I believe Jacobs was ready to continue. If you don't believe me, just continue watching the video. And look at how Jacobs keeps arguing with Byrd at what would have been the count of 6. He's telling him he's okay. He's like, I'm good. He says it like 20 times. He's trying to get up and Byrd is saying stay down. He's like, I'm good, man. I'm good. Even when the HBO cameras go off of him and they focus on Pirog, you can hear him in the background still arguing with Byrd, telling him he's good. Now, had Robert Byrd given him the count as Frank Cappuccino did with Briggs, the fight would have continued, in my opinion. Not saying that he would have won. I'm just saying it would have continued. So I think, and nobody pressed him on that. They had an interview with Jacobs right after that, and I'm like, well, somebody ask him, because the way he bounced up, he was good. You just got to watch it. Judge for yourself. Let me know below. I'm not saying the guy would have won. Just like with the Briggs fight, I think he was okay at the count of 6, just by the way he bounced up. So sometimes Jacobs also paws with his jab. It's another weakness, and if he does it too much against Golovkin, he's going to get countered over top of it. One thing he needs to pay attention to. Another thing Jacobs does is he always squares up a lot, and that's bad for this fight for 2 reasons. First of all, it gives Golovkin more targets to hit. And secondly, it puts Jacobs off balance when he needs to move or to punch. These 2 reasons are more important in this fight to me than his chin itself. If the chin is shaky, it is. However, if you make these 2 mistakes, then you're going to leave it open for everybody to know 100%. If you look at the fight below, this is the 3rd video I'm going to leave below. If you look at the fight below against Sergio Mora, in which Jacobs was knocked down, watch how he comes in. He comes in squared up, Okay, and he got caught. Big target, no balance. Number one, gives Golovkin more of a target. Number two, puts Jacobs off balance. So watch the first 15 seconds of the video and you'll see the highlight. And then they'll show a replay. He came in with that square biz like Tina Marie, and he paid the price. So he definitely wants to avoid that square biz against Golovkin, or he will pay the price. So let's look at Gennady Golovkin's strengths. Of course, we'll start with the first strength being his power. Guy hits like a light heavyweight. There are only 3 men who can say they went the distance with Gennady Golovkin. Those were fights number 9 in his career, number 11 in his career, and number 13. One anomaly I found out is this. The boxer who last went the distance with Golovkin was knocked out 5 times before he faced Golovkin. And his record at the time was 13 wins and 9 losses, with 5 losses by knockout before he went the distance with Golovkin. I'd sure love to ask Golovkin what happened in that fight, because it seems strange that he would be the guy who last went the distance with Gennady Golovkin. He's a prime knockout candidate. It puzzles me. I certainly would love to hear what he had to say about not being able to stop a guy with such a record. It puzzles me. Anyway, another strength that Gennady Golovkin has that I don't hear mentioned by too many people is he has great balance. It's an underrated trait, but it allows him to get punches off with force, while it also allows him to absorb blows without going down. Same point that I made with Jacobs about the balance thing, about being square and what have you. So that could be a key in a fight like this for Golovkin, because Jacobs is a hard hitter. Another thing Golovkin has is a solid chin. Let me tell you something. He better have a solid chin, because if Jacobs lands his money punch on him, it could be trouble for Gennady Golovkin in this one. Gennady Golovkin also may be one of the best, if not the best, at cutting the ring off when he's stalking an opponent. This aspect of his game has led or has helped contribute to his high knockout ratio, even when he's fighting against people who like to move. Lastly, Gennady Golovkin has one of the best, if not the best, jabs in boxing. Let's take a look at some of Gennady Golovkin's weaknesses. Golovkin sometimes lets his guard down and gets hit. Now, whether you want to believe it's by design or not, to me it's not the appropriate or the germane thing to do in the boxing ring. In Golovkin's last fight, he also got very sloppy and started to head hunt against Kell Brook, landing at times but often missing and being consequently out of defensive position, which in turn got him hit a few times. That's a no-no in this fight. Gennady Golovkin's power sometimes diminishes his weaknesses. You have a guy in Daniel Jacobs who has power, and if a weakness is exposed, he's going to land a big shot on Golovkin. And then we're going to really see what he's made of. I think the truest weakness for Golovkin, in my opinion, is his age. Gennady Golovkin will be 35 years old very soon. He's, I don't want to use the word deteriorated, but let's just say he's slipped a little bit. Just a little bit. And guess what? He's supposed to slip at age 35. And with being a guy who doesn't use performance enhancing substances and what have you, he's supposed to slip. I'm a Golovkin fan. There are Golovkin fans who don't want to admit that, but he has slipped a little bit, and that's natural. He's been VADA tested numerous times and in numerous fights. So he's supposed to slip. It's natural. And Gennady Golovkin is no longer in his physical prime at age 35. Let's be real. If he hadn't slipped, I'd have questions. I'd say, well, what is this guy on? So the fact that he slipped a little bit, it's normal. How much has he slipped? Well, we don't know. But the clock's ticking. So let's go over the keys to victory and the prediction. Keys to victory. For Jacobs to win, he's going to have to use his superior hand speed and movement. That movement needs to be horizontal or diagonal, but just not backwards. And if you do go backwards, it should be at an angle and not straight back. Jacobs also has to land a statement punch early to claim his territory on March 18th. And you know what? I get the feeling he may be able to do that in this fight. This is going to be a good fight for as long as it lasts, folks. Don't get it twisted. Golovkin isn't going to take too many backward steps, and Jacobs isn't going to take too many backward steps because he can't. He can't afford to do it. If he does, he loses big in this fight. Remember that. Both fighters have knocked out about 90% of their opponents, as I stated earlier. Jacobs is hot right now on a 3-year winning streak. 12 knockouts in a row. Golovkin, of course, is on a 33-fight career winning streak and has stopped 20 opponents in a row. Whereas Jacobs has 15 knockouts in his last 16 fights. You can't ask for a better matchup than this. So he's not far behind Golovkin in that situation, for sure. Jacobs also has excellent height and a 4-inch reach advantage. He needs to use these advantages in this fight. For Jacobs to win, he also has to get inside of Golovkin, get off, and then tie him up. He has to throw a looping right hand behind the ear and over Gennady's guard when Golovkin's hands are up in a defensive mode. I can envision Daniel Jacobs starting fast, as he's done before, and trying to catch Gennady cold. Daniel has shown the ability to use footwork and pivot at angles to hurt his opponents with an array of combinations. He'll need to do that in this fight if he wants to win. He has a definite hand speed advantage. He needs to use it. He must also use his movement to control the pace of the fight. While it may be beneficial for both fighters to try to save some of their fire for the later rounds, I doubt it happens here. I seriously do. It's kind of like Prodigy from Mobb Deep. What he said in the infamous Prelude, it's all about who gets who first. That's what this fight is about. Golovkin will be there to be hit at times, and so will Jacobs. If this was Gabe Rosado, I'd say, okay, try to score and move the entire fight and give yourself an outside chance to win against Triple G. However, this isn't Gabe Rosado. Jacobs presents power that Golovkin hasn't had to deal with since who knows when. Marco Antonio Rubio, Curtis Stevens had power, but not the raw one-punch power that has allowed Jacobs to knock out 12 straight opponents in 15 out of 16. At least based on that streak. Let's just put it that way. Listen, folks. Jacobs has 33 professional fights, and 29 of those cats blew bubbles. Or in standard English, they got knocked the hell out. For people like Rosado, Willie Monroe Jr., the plan against Golovkin was simple. Punch, grab, and move. Then repeat 200 times. The idea was to frustrate Golovkin. In the case of Jacobs, however, the plan is much simpler. Destroy. That's what the book says. I believe that Jacobs is going to land on Golovkin and land hard. I wouldn't be surprised if he wobbles or even buzzes Golovkin. I know Golovkin hasn't been dropped as an amateur, allegedly, or pro, but that's how hard Jacobs hits if he lands on the money. As the fight goes longer, there's a chance it could favor Jacobs. He seems to have found a way to keep his power in the middle to late rounds, if you look at some of his fights. One concern I have is about Jacobs and the VADA testing. While it says he's registered, I notice when I look at other people, his date is like after the fight. Meaning we could have an Emmanuel Leem or Keith Thurman type situation here. I mean, I'm going to cover more on that in a later video. Also, if Jacob struggles, he should learn from whatever Andre Ward is going to teach him in training camp, which is some of those grappling tactics, the wrestling that Ward does on the inside to try to frustrate Golovkin. And then when the referee breaks, you try to use your height and reach to, as he comes back in, to kind of pick him off, as your shots should land, and your hand speed, so your shots should land quicker off of every break. Lastly, one thing Jacobs needs to do is feed off of the crowd. There will be many New Yorkers there cheering for their hometown guy, and as each round goes by, Jacobs' confidence will grow if he feeds off that crowd. It's kind of like when Villanova Wildcats beat Georgetown Hoyas back in 1985. Georgetown was a big favorite in the NCAA basketball final. And as more shots started to fall for Villanova, they gained confidence. And eventually they pulled off the biggest upset in NCAA final basketball history. Same with Jacobs. As each round goes by and the crowd is getting into it, feed off of that. Gain some confidence. And who knows? In this sport, who knows? Let's look at Golovkin. For Golovkin to win, he needs to follow the Curtis Stevens and David Lemieux blueprint. Golovkin can stalk if he wants, but be cautious. It's risky, and he doesn't know what kind of dynamite Jacobs carries early on, but my game plan would be to not think you'll just steamroll this guy, steamroll his chin. Jacobs ain't going out like that in front of the home crowd, I can tell you that. Golovkin needs to take his time, find his range, and you do that with the big factor for him in this fight, that lethal jab he has. Keep putting that stick out there to Jacobs' chin and to his body. Loved the jab to the body. And while Golovkin will have to overcome a reach disadvantage in order to do that, I think Golovkin will need to use timing and craftiness to get the jab through to the taller opponent in this fight. Golovkin also must force Jacobs to go backwards, and he must attack Daniel's body. If he does that, he has a good shot. The verdict. What gives a fighter the greatest chance to win, but simultaneously gives him the greatest chance to lose? Although there's great potential here for Jacobs, I believe Gennady Golovkin is a better boxer. I think Daniel Jacobs' best chance is to rush Golovkin from the opening bell and try to land something big. The problem is Jacobs may come in square, giving Golovkin a bigger target. If he doesn't do that, then Jacobs may get wild, as he was with Quillen, and walk into something. If he doesn't do that, then he might get countered by Golovkin. My guess is that at some point in this fight, Jacobs hits Golovkin with a good shot that may hurt him a little bit or possibly wobble him. I can see a Hagler-Hearns scenario with Jacobs playing the role of Hearns and hurting Golovkin just as Hearns did Hagler. At first I saw this fight going into the later rounds with Golovkin catching Jacobs and taking him out late. And I thought this because Jacobs is going to fight like a dog in front of his home crowd. Believe that. Standard thought had Jacobs able to box and last quite a few rounds in his backyard. Why do I say that? Well, it's because it's in Madison Square Garden. And let's take a look at Golovkin's history in Madison Square Garden. Conventional thought now. Standard thought says Jacobs will last into the later rounds, just like Curtis Stevens, another Brooklyn guy, David Lemieux, and Gabriel Rosado did. All of those fights happened in the Garden. And all of those guys went distance, deep into the fight, mid to late rounds with Golovkin. However, despite Jacobs' home advantage and despite Golovkin's advanced age, I think this fight comes down to the resume of Golovkin being immeasurably better than that of Jacobs. Don't sleep on that. If the bell sounds to end the 7th round and Jacobs comes out for the 8th, I'd be shocked. Early on, I thought this would go into the late rounds. Once Golovkin got hurt, he'd survive and go back to his corner with the mindset to box a little bit and then try to take Jacobs out methodically. I think that still happens, but now I believe it'll happen earlier. And that'll be the difference in this fight. Golovkin will find a way to survive Jacobs, but Jacobs won't find a way to survive Golovkin. A straight right hand will get the party started, an uppercut will keep the party going, and a left hook will land to finish Daniel Jacobs. Give me Gennady Golovkin by knockout no later than the 7th round. However, I wouldn't be surprised if it happened a few rounds earlier. I do think he gets hit this fight. I think he gets buzzed. I think the crowd gets on their feet. But as Kell Brook learned and as I believe Daniel Jacobs will, you are in there with a monster. You're in there with the boogeyman. And if he can survive you, the question is, can you survive him? And in this fight, Jacobs is going to put up a great effort in front of the hometown crowd, but it won't be enough. But he'll forever be that guy who goes to fights and signs autographs and people will say, yo, even though you lost, you had him, because I really think he's going to land something that of note that he can keep with him and that everybody will remind him of for the rest of his life. But his approach, let me clear one thing up in closing. The negotiations didn't take long because Daniel Jacobs was scared. Concerned, yes. Who wouldn't be concerned? Just like Team Golovkin is going to be concerned with Jacobs' powers. So there's always concern, but he wasn't scared. And he's not scared because of life situations. I mean, here's a guy who was penciled in to die and maybe not even walk or definitely not to box. So he's faced that outside of the ring. So to say he's scared by a man, I don't see it. And I know how to read body language and so forth. And when I watch the press conferences and I see the interviews with Jacobs, I don't see that false confidence in his eyes. I don't hear it in his voice. He's ready. He's ready for this fight. So if you think fear has anything to do with it, I can tell you with great confidence, you're wrong. Once again, give me Gennady Golovkin by knockout no later than the 7th. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened a few rounds earlier than the 7th. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. We got about 11,000 or so followers on Twitter. And also, make sure you subscribe. We want subscriptions. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to be giving away some prizes in 2017. And one of the requirements is that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got a Saul Canelo Alvarez versus Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. prediction coming up. So tune in for that. And until then, we catch you on the next one.
Gennady Golovkin, Triple G, FightJournal.com. Al, I told you, man. Yes, sir. FightJournal.com, baby. We here.